The first thing that we wanted to talk about from the state of play was a game that seems to be causing a lot of buzz because it's a newcomer, and that is Tides of Annihilation. So, Tom, what are your thoughts on Tides of Annihilation?
I think there were a lot of games kind of on the show which were, there was a lot going on, lots of titles kind of being thrown at us, and it's hard to keep track of all these new IPs, right? But this one stood out to me especially because it's got this, it's captured on PS5 Pro very transparently at the start. It says in the captions, which is always a plus to see. Interestingly, there's an Xbox trailer which uses the exact same gameplay on the Xbox YouTube channel, but removes that caption. So, there we go. It's Unreal Engine 5, which I think we'll see is a recurring theme across most of the titles being shown at this event. And yeah, it's a debut release as well for Eclipse Glow Games, a Shanghai-based studio. And yeah, it's multi-platform, of course. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's there's a later, a longer gameplay trailer, which actually gave us a bit more detail on the kind of the nuts and bolts of the gameplay. It's kind of this Devil May Cry style. Inevitably there's a bit of a Souls influence, but I'd argue that Devil May Cry always had a bit of a Soulsy look and style to it, with the action combat. But we got a good look at long stretches of gameplay, beautiful environments, some incredible large scale bosses, almost God of War-esque. There was a lot going on in terms of the hair and cloth in the game, and there's this sort of combat system with 2 knights that you can summon with different elemental attacks, ice and fire. So that's the sort of setting. Then in terms of the tech, this is gunning for 60 FPS, as you'd hope for a kind of DMC style game. And it's also interesting to see that, on the PlayStation blog, they go into a little bit of detail, just a smidge, to say that there's a enhanced mode on PS5 Pro, which is being developed exclusively for PS5 Pro players. And with that GPU power, there's PSSR, there's higher resolution, ray tracing, improved image fidelity, and smoother 60 FPS gameplay. So yeah, there's something on show here for PS5 Pro users, and in testing it, kind of based on the footage we've got, it's you definitely go a good lock at 60 most of the time, but there were a few drops, I guess, that were quite easy to notice, even without frame rate tools. I think I don't know if you spotted it.
It was pretty obvious to my eye.
Yeah. But yeah, there's, I think it's especially in the boss battle with all the flying projectiles, you can really see dips there. But hey, it's the release date is not even on the
there.
cards.
This looks like a 2026 title to me. Yeah.
So I guess the last little point I wanted to add on this is the kind of native resolution side. And I think you, Alex, had a look at this with me, and we found some weird results in there. It was like native 1080p, but then some shots, as we kind of walk around this giant structure, this giant moving creature, it drops to 576p. And so I have no idea what that's about. It was like a completely baffling, what on earth is this sort of moment. So we'll be able to read more into that when it comes out, obviously, but 1080p seems like what they're gunning for.
I mean, with using Unreal, it's a notoriously GPU heavy engine, and especially if this is using any of the things that they mentioned on the blog, like ray tracing, it dipping below 1080p wouldn't be actually so surprising. I think we've seen that in a number of titles already, even on PlayStation 5 Pro. And, this is also still heavily work in progress. That disclaimer should always be kept up. But one thing that I thought was a little bit that I didn't like about this trailer is that it does say it's running on PlayStation 5 Pro, but there was a really big discrepancy between the gameplay sections and the cinematic sections in terms of pure resolution. And I think that was obvious just from the user perspective of watching this trailer. Like, the cinematics looked incredibly good, while the gameplay looked a lot blurrier and dithered and aliased. So they say it's running on PlayStation 5 Pro for this trailer, but I honestly almost doubt it for those cinematic sections. I couldn't possibly believe that. Looking at the game's technology itself, they say it is using Unreal, and they do mention ray tracing in the blog, but I'm not exactly sure what we are looking here at with this trailer, because even with Unreal Engine 5 Lumen engaged, which this could potentially be using, I really don't have any great evidence of it from this trailer. There's a lot of sections where you could see that a lot of the reflections were driven purely by screen space reflections. There's the boss battle, we're in this like pool, and there's all these archways with like really bright skylighting behind them.
Yeah.
And all that is all, every single time it's obscured, it just disappears completely. Whereas with Lumen, yes, there's a ton of screen space elements to it, but behind those screen space reflections is at least some facsimile of a more true reflection using Lumen, even in software mode. So I'm not exactly sure what we were looking at here, but I did think the cutscene quality was really high. Dialogue, not to my taste, but that is a whole other question. I guess, yeah, the only critique then we'll have probably about a lot of the other things at the show is that this was a third-person action game, and there was a lot of them at the show. So after the entire show was done, it was hard to exactly place what I saw. But this one was probably the most standout one to me from a visual perspective. I actually thought this was one of the better games visually at the show.
Yeah, I mean, I'd completely agree with Alex's comments, and I'd echo his remarks there. I think it looks great. I think it's one of the better looking games at the show, but I also think this crop of games at this particular show was not maybe of the highest graphical quality always necessarily in every single respect here. Especially, in those cutscenes, they do look incredible, like Alex mentioned. Often in UE, you do have incredible looking cutscenes, right? But then there's the gameplay in there. It doesn't look as good. I noticed the issues with the Lumen reflections that you mentioned. It could be using Lumen GI. Hard to say, I guess, at this point. But yeah, there are some discontinuities in the reflections, and that's a little bit disappointing. And then performance is all over the place, but it seems a little preemptive to make some judgment on performance, given that this is maybe over a year out from release, potentially, in all likelihood, given they aren't specifying a date. That probably means it's not 2025. But I mean, I like what's here in terms of the art direction. I think they seem to be using Unreal in a pretty competent manner. I like the animation. I like the fighting. I like a lot of things here. Frame rate isn't perfect. Some visual issues here and there, but I'm generally happy with it. Again, it's like another Unreal Engine game, and you can kind of spot them from a mile away. They all look, generally, if they're produced by a big enough team, they all tend to look pretty good. Artists have a lot of tools within that engine to make scenes look good. So it just kind of is what it is at this point.